Hi everyone, and welcome to the Cyber Core Skills course, lesson number 3, Windows and Active Directories. So let's get in. This one's going to be straight in with some practical work and sort of minimal theory. So this is going to be covered in a couple of videos, but a couple of videos based on theory. So we're going to be covering quite a bit. We're going to be covering building the server, hostname IP addressing, including a bit of sysprep, which is something that people need to know about, especially when we've already just covered virtualization in lesson 2. Making it a domain controller. Oh, hold on 2 seconds. And making it a domain controller, so the server we just built, we'll be creating using groups on it. We'll be playing with a little bit of group policy for security and software deployment, even though at the minute that's probably not the best way to run it, but it's just good for awareness. We'll build using a different server, a separate standalone one. We'll create a file server. We'll create folder structure, a couple of files on there. We'll be setting permissions based on the users and groups that we've already set, and it will sort of explain a little bit about that, because that's sort of within sysadmin and sort of IT support, but also within a cyber world. That's quite good to know, because the sort of quote that I did earlier was if you know how to build it, you know how to exploit it. So if you can exploit file permissions or sort of get on that leverage, then that's quite good. We'll build a Windows 10 client and join that to the domain, and then see how we can interact and what we're experiencing. And then later lessons that do take a little bit of time, we'll be creating and hosting an IIS web server and creating an Exchange server, which will all be standalone servers away from our domain controller, just because we don't want to cause any real load on that. We're also going to be doing it based on our previous build of the ESXI server hypervisor. So the plan is here's our ESXI hypervisor, and I've not loaded anything up pre-video, so we're going to go through the entire process, load some of the lesson 2 stuff up from my management client, which is my physical machine. We're going to be building a separate file server and a separate Windows 10 client, and then we're going to be putting our files on there and our users on there. And it's going to be strange how they're going to be interacting, but it's going to be good. And I'm going to aim to have these on different subnets. So at the minute, our ESXI server is being allocated an IP address, 192.168, I think it's 1 something within a 100 number. We're going to have this on like a 10 network, so we know it's totally separate. So we've got our little domain here acting on the same logical switch and communicating on the same logical switch using layer 2 MAC addressing, but also they're going to be having its own subnet. So actually it's not really talking to our management VLAN effectively of the ESXI server and the management host. So that's quite good, and we can prove it's separate there. Right, back to the bit that I normally like to cover off is a little bit of qualifications and awareness. As you can see at the bottom there, MCSA and MCSE certifications retired in 2020, which were quite big ones. The MCSE was 4 exams had to be completed before you're awarded that title, and it was per version of operating system. So you might have been a MCSE server 2016, and you might not necessarily qualify for 2019, but that's the way it was. Now the main focus is on Azure, which is cloud. We're going to be covering that in lesson 9 a lot more. We're going to be covering Azure and AWS, an introduction to them, and actually using AWS a whole lot more and creating those sort of cloud instances for exactly what we're creating here, so the Windows domain at the minute. You can see the qualification strands there. I've done the AZ900 qualification, which is pretty simple. It's sort of like a day's worth of instruction with a multiple choice exam. Not much hands-on, but as you go through, Azure sort of administrator is the one that sort of the MCSA stands against. So the AZ103 then goes up in difficulty. That brings in Active Directory such. So us touching on Active Directories and user computers and server manager, we're sort of going more in line with the AZ103. And good news at the minute is currently within 2022, Microsoft have opened up a lot of their exams, so providing you complete the training through their platforms and get all those ticks in the box and understanding, a lot of their exams are free at the minute, so you can regenerate qualifications on that, and it's just worth a Google, or LinkedIn or Twitter, Microsoft free training and exam vouchers. Cool. So, as I keep saying, let's get practical. We're going to be building this, so let's start. I'll pull over my lesson 2 folder right here. And what we can see from here, I've got my ESXI server, I've got a couple of lesson 3 files, so I've got file server, I've got a Windows client, and obviously what you can't see from there is my domain controller. I'm going to be hosting that on ESXI server, so there's no need for me to have a folder here because it's going to be stored in there. Okay, I've got my source files, so at the minute I've got a that is so that's my Windows 10 and that's my server 19. So I'm going to be doing this on Microsoft Server 2019. I'm doing it on 180-day free license used for sort of familiarization really, and that's what benefits us as part of the training. We can use these evaluation licenses for training on, for building and exploring, and also sort of getting more familiar. So I'm using the ones directly from Microsoft's website, and as part of those free licenses, it was a part of the links that I set up during lesson 2. I will post the links lesson 3, including some more specific Server 19 Windows 10. Obviously Windows 11 is available now. We could use that if we wanted to. So I'm just going to load up my ESXI server first. Where we're at the minute is we've got no VMs running, and we're wanting to build the domain hosted on this virtual environment from lesson 2, as previously stated, and we're wanting to put our domain controller onto our ESXI server and build our file server separately. So what we're going to do is use these source files. As you can see, we've got 3 here. We've got our server 2022, which is very current, and we've got a Windows 10 and Windows 11 ISO. I've joined Windows 10 to the domain before, but I've never joined a Windows 11, and we're really going to use this server 2022 evaluation. So I'm going to be using this as the standalone and for the on our data center, our ESXI server. So what I've already done is, in preparation for this, I've already uploaded it to our ESXI server. So if I just bring up our ESXI server, take a little minute to load, and then start it. Cool, it shouldn't take a little minute. So this was gracefully shut down. It'll boot up. We'll access the GUI from the Chrome, from the vSphere website. Log on, check out our data stores, see where the files have been stored, and then we'll start building out our domain controller. And then outside of that, within the, not physical because it's all virtual, but outside of the ESXI server, we'll build our Server 2022 file server. Still both generic servers, it's just each server's got slightly more functionality than the other. The domain controller effectively has got Active Directories, services installed, which has users and computers and everything managed within that, which we'll get onto. Cool. So once this is booted, we'll start to build our domain controller. I'm just going to bring up Chrome in preparation. So HTTP I'm 192.168. And we're waiting for the DHCP IP address to be applied to it. When it comes up, this shouldn't take a little second. It's probably got the same processing as sort of Windows. When it comes up, it gets down to the last few percent and says, oh, I'm going to take 30 minutes on this last percent. Here we go. It's just starting the services now, so that's what's taking the time. And then HTTPS. There we go, 160.137. Cool. So that's communicating internally. And if I go root cat ssw0rd, and we've noticed up here it's not HTTPS, it's actually HTTP, because that's because of the I've got no trusted CA within my LAN at the minute, which I'm probably not going to build just because of the conformity of it. We can always build that we can always add it to our domain, but as soon as we start talking about enterprise and using ESXI, we do talk about enterprise grade networks, and it's worth, when you have virtual servers and virtualization, and if it's a hybrid, half cloud, half on premises, it's worth having your own CA, or at least having certificates throughout. So storage, I'm just going to check out the data center I've got here and see what I've got installed. So I've got ISO store, and here we go, we've got 2 ISOs at the minute. I've got my server 2022 and my Ubuntu from lesson number 2. I'm going to be using this server 2022 to build out my domain controller. Something I learned quite early on with regards to this was about controlling of what the virtual CD or virtual DVD drive it connects to. I'll show you what I mean in a minute, and it's probably one of the lessons learned from this video. So let's create our domain controller. So as you saw there, I created virtual machines, create VM, create new virtual machine, same as last time, not an OVF or OVA, which is our packaged up virtual machines. I'm going to call it DC01 and say what type I'm going for. So I don't see, oh no, server 2022, that's good. Enable Windows virtualization based security, that's obviously going to be good. We've only got 1 data store storage, I've got 78 gig free, so I'm going to be using into that. This then, because we've selected the 2022, it's given it some default profile. So what I'm going to do is lower that to 60 gig and then use the recommended. I'm going to put that onto the VM workstation and data center ISO. So what this is, so I'll talk about this. This is imperative. This is what sent me around the sort of editing video and things. This again. So if I select host device and have that ticked, it's going to be using the host device's CD DVD drive, and I'll show you what the host device currently is. The host device is, let me bring up this. So the host device is our ESXI server, and if I go power, removable CD, that's connected, and if I go settings, so it's going to connect to the VM hypervisor. So I'm going to be installing another ESXI server in an ESXI server. Without going full inception, I'm quite happy not to do that. So I'm going to select, I'm not going to have host device, because I'm not going to be, if I wanted to, I could load the ISO into the ESXI server and do it from there, which we are, but we're doing it from the stored. If I select from data store and then go, there we go, select my eval there. So I've got data store selected, not host. That's sort of a big lesson learned from this video. Power on connection, and away we go. Finish. So that'll quickly create it. Then it should power on in a few moments. So we've created our VM successfully and power it on anyway. And let's see if I should boot. Oh, quickly. There we go. Pressed any key just in time. Obviously, I found the any key on the keyboard. I can adjust myself after I press that. And we've got our server 2022 booting, which is our domain controller. What I'm going to do in the background is start our file server, which is the same operating system. It's just going to be standalone. It's just to show you a little bit the balance, really. So if I go file server, I've currently got that blank. I'm just going to copy this, and then on our ESXI server, just on the VM workstation, we go file, new virtual machine, custom. I'm going to install the operating system afterwards. The reason I'm going, I'll tell you why. Typical, it wants to install it with a few easy steps. I sort of want to take a little bit more control over what I'm clicking, networks to choose other sizes, and additionally to that, I want to make sure what. Additionally, I also want to choose to put the ISO in afterwards it's booted, because you might get errors during the typical stage. So custom, we want to do it on our VM workstation, which is good. I want to install the ISO later, so it's going to be a blank hard drive. I'm going to select 2019 because even though it's 2022, it's the closest server we can get to it, and that's going to be the profile loaded effectively for the memory. So if I go file server 01, because we've already created DC01, and we're creating it within our file server folder, and EUIF, I don't need secure boot because I don't need virtualization. I might try 4 and 2 and just see if I can push the limits and make my laptop sweat a little bit more. Yeah, so 2 megabytes of memory, virtual, natted, select that, and the virtual switch we're going to be using, create new virtual machine, 60 gigs of storage, which is good, and that's the hard drive there, and finish. Cool, so we're going to let that boot up, and we're actually going to hopefully try do them side by side, and then try make them communicate with each other. So that's that, and that's within the window of that. So this should be booting now. That will boot to a blank virtual machine because we've not got our ISO attached. So that'll be booting to a blank, and then if I just go power, removable devices, CD, DVD, and make sure I tick connected, which is a big thing. Browse, I want my server 2022 eval. Tick connected, otherwise it doesn't detect it. And then if I hit enter a few times, it's not going to work because it's already gone past the SATA DVD CD stage. I'm going to reboot this by hitting Control Delete, or you can just press reboot. Quick delete, any key, then Windows setup, and we're in. Cool. I'm going to try and build these side by side. So if I just put that there, and put that here. Oh no, that's made it full screen. That's fine. So we can see there we're going to have this boot to the same stage, but we'll just sort of domain controller on the right, file server on the left, and we're basically following the same options for each, but one's within an ESXI server, which is this one on here, and this one here is the sort of standalone but directly using VM workstation. I'm going to see this sort of the difference in speed of setting up really. Just want to select UK keyboard, that's good. Next, install. Let's check out which one's going to be a little bit quicker. So they're both running off of different ISO files as well. So this one is running off of the ISO file which is based on the ESXI server, and this one is running the one that's virtually in its sort of CD DVD drive. Cool, and that was pretty the same really. So eval, next. Here we go. I just want to keeping a close eye. Oh, actually, the ESXI server was slightly quicker. Agree. So this stage we select custom, and we can select whichever partition we want to be using. So if we've got multiple hard drives, they'll appear here, but obviously we selected 60 gigs for each. So that's what we've got free, and then there we go. So that's currently our domain controller and our file server building, and the main objective, as I said, was to get it to the desktop. So all we need to do is get both of these to the desktop, set the host name, set the IP addresses, make sure they can talk to each other, then make this one a domain controller, then we'll be highly concentrating that one, and then we will get this one to be a file server. So we'll join, once the domain's up, once we've created this as a domain controller, which is the primary objective of a domain controller is to provide authentication within a Windows domain, or within a domain anyway, because it can provide authentication various different means, whether it's to network devices using Radius, for example. But we can see here, actually this one's being slightly quicker. I'm also going to build my Windows 10 machine, I might as well. So our Windows 10 machine, what we're going to be doing is using that to join our domain later, and I'll we might as well build the Windows 11 machine as well. So I'm just going to create the folder structures for that within the sort of my lesson environment. So I've already got Windows Workstation here. I'm just going to rename this. Show more options. I'm still getting used to Windows 11. Rename Windows Client 11. New folder. Lesson 3. Win Client 10. Cool. So what we're going to do is build our Windows 10 first. Do we want to? We set up the folder structures. I'm not going to build them just because this one might be built sooner. This one's taking a little bit more time than storage because it's going through sort of double layers of virtualization. It's the processing and then it's getting processed again on the ESXI server, whereas our sort of only one layer of virtualization for our file servers going a little bit quicker. So we'll work a lot on our file server. Cool. What I'll do is I'll stop these and then pick up back up when they're both sort of at the stage ready to click next anyway. Cool. Cool, so we're very much getting there. We're now just installing features and updates and then finishing off on our file server. So we're going to get that to the desktop. And then we're still waiting for our domain controller, which is going through the ESXI server to complete its final stages of build. But we're going to carry on with the file server anyway, just in the meantime, and then repeat the process on the domain controller. Cool, so this should build. And then once we've got both to desktop, we will be installing VMware tools, which is quite a handy little thing anyway. So I'll just keep pressing X on that for now. That's if they're not already installed, which is quite interesting. Cool, they shouldn't take a little minute. So this is almost like building your home computer really. Very much Server 2022 is built around Windows 10 and Windows 11. So it's designed to operate. So there is a bit of a table about what clients or what operating systems that we use at home for clients operate with what server system and which one works best. So like, for example, Server 2003 used to work great with XP. And around that time and onwards. So Windows 12 was based for Windows 7. Well, Server 2012 was based for working with Windows 7. Now we're sort of working from Windows 10 onwards for Server 2016 and then on for 2022 working with Windows 11 now really. And we're at a good point now where Windows 11 is got enough patches and it's further through its development where things are functioning, and it's one of the most sort of advanced operating systems security wise, so that's why it's good we're sort of using the most current operating systems within this training, and it's something that I didn't want to disadvantage. Cool. So maybe I should have added a little bit more RAM to each of these just to pick up the build, because I think the ESXI server is going to be taking a little bit of time. But we'll come back once it's all sort of settled down anyway. Cool, see you in a sec. Cool, so now we're at the part of setting up our file server, which is Server 2022. And we've said using a GUI, which is a lot better really for what we're doing within training. You'd use a core edition when resources are limited or when you're going to be using a lot. So we're just going to set up this at the minute is the local administrator account for each one. So we're setting up the local administrator for each server, and then when we get to the domain controller and set up the administrator on that, that will be the domain administrator for both, for the entire domain really. So when we're adding clients to domain, that's what we'll use. Right, let's get on the file server. So I can either press Control Insert to work with the virtual machine, or just press Control Delete up here. I'm going to extend this a little bit down just so we can see it. Actually, I'll make it bigger. We know this is running in the background, but I'll just make this so. Cool, so that's just loading in the background. So this is Server 2022. I've not worked with this personally. I've worked with 16 and 19, but it's can't be that much different surely. So what we should expect is Server Manager to load up in the background. The reason why it's small is VM Tools is not yet installed, but Server Manager loads up as expected, and it will tell us a sort of automatically generated, computer name. It will probably have either DHCP IP address, that's what we're asking for at the minute, which we have to assign a static, and then we're also, that could, if we had a failure of DHCP IP address, we'd end up with an APIPA. Cool, so I'm just going to put no to discovering for this network. Then let's see what we've got. So local server, this should pull off some information for us about what's going on. So we've got our computer name up here, it's in a work group, which is not on a domain, it's sat there by itself. Its IP address is DHCP, and cool, that's what's giving us our time information and how much storage we've got. Don't tend to often work from Server Manager at this point. We work with Server Manager when we're trying to install our different services. So I'm just going to set our computer name and our IP address, which we can do together really. Easiest way I find is sort of clicking on the Documents button down here. We can now take off the CD-ROM because at this point the operating system's built. So I'm just going to take out the virtual CD-ROM. So if we go CD disconnect, so we should see that disappear in a sec. There you go, so that's disappeared. If we click on this computer, click Properties, and this is where I work from, and rename this computer. They've added a few more with later operating systems that you're expecting to see one menu, and they've sort of changed it to more of a simpler method. So this is DC01, no, this is FS01, so this is our file server. Next, it will say, if you want to change it, it will require a reboot. I'm going to hold off rebooting just until I've changed the, IP address. So that's our computer name changed, quite simply. If I go open this, then Ethernet, change options. So this is very much different to sort of the rest of the, like Server 2012 doesn't work like this, but and a lot of places are still using it, but you still resort to the same menus that you had in XP. It's like a weird mix of operating systems. So I did say we're going to work on like the 10 network. I'm going to play it a little bit by ear at the minute, and then at the end of the lesson I'll produce a nice diagram based on what we've got. So if I go 10.0.0. So I'm going to make one my domain controller, and this is a file server. I'm just going to go 10 for now. I'm going to use the default subnet mask, which is 255.0.0.0. I can add 10.0.0.0.255. I'm fully aware that the rest can be 255s as well, but no, let's make this a class C actually. 255, 255. Let's be efficient. So we're only using 256 IP addresses, network and the broadcast within that last octet. It's class C subnet mask with a class A IP address, private IP address as well. So preferred DNS, this is important now. So we've not yet done it, but we'll see it once it's installed. The domain controller will be our primary DNS server. So if I go 10.0.0.1, which is our domain controller IP address, and press OK on that, and press OK. So that's identifying. Give it a little second to settle in. Whoop, and allow that. Yeah, we've only got one network card on this, so if I just So with later servers, obviously we've got availability of PowerShell and command prompts. If I bring up PowerShell and hit enter, often I'll bring up command prompt because it's CMD and it's a lot quicker to bring up. PowerShell does take a little bit extra just to bring on through the menu. And if I hit enter a few times on it, and ipconfig, providing it's not capitals, ipconfig 10.0.0.10, class C, default gateway, and then if I do /all, so that proves there's only one network card. We've got our client name, which hasn't changed because we've not rebooted. We'll check it once it's rebooted, and then we've got our IP address. Cool. And what you don't see within ipconfig is the DNS IP address. So we can see it there, we've verified it. So if I just now reboot this, power restart, and restart, happy days. So that prompted to say, why are you rebooting? Often within Windows, we don't like to reboot, and that's why it's mainly for the log entries. So here we go, we've got this rebooting, and we're still building our domain controller within our ESXI server. I feel that's going to be a little bit slower actually, but we'll still work with it. We'll still work with the original plan, even if it does take a little bit longer. Cool. So, waiting for this to reboot, we'll check that the name's changed. We've got our IP address set, and then we'll probably quit and wait for the domain controller to boot, and we'll get it to the same point, getting to the desktop with the name set and the IP address. Cool, let's get back in. Control delete or control insert. So you can press that as control delete, but for virtual machines it's control insert. Cancel P at SSW0D, and away we go. Take a little minute. I won't be insulted if you're watching this back on 2x speed. And just to prove, I'm going to bring command prompt in just because it's easier. CMD, enter. Config. Yep, we verified the IP address, and we verified its FS01. So once we've joined our domain, we should see the primary DNS suffix change here, and happy days. Cool, right. So that's it, that's ready to go. We're waiting for the domain controller to finish building, and then once that's finished building, we'll come back, we'll set the IP address, set the host name, let it reboot, and then we will manage it more. Brilliant, I'll see you in a minute. So something really clever, just while waiting for the domain controller to continue, is I've closed the window that we're operating from, but what you can do is instead of using the web interface for these clients, is use a console connection. So if I click console up here, and then I can download VMRC, which is the remote connection, or I can launch remote console, and what it will do is launch it in Windows VM workstation. I'm just going to click allow and then drop it in. So now we're using this workstation for everything, and we can see this is now finished the installation part, and it's just going to quickly reboot. Might lose this connection because it's currently interfacing via IP address. I'm half expecting this to drop because of the reboot. But we're currently playing this on the real machine because it's on the same network as. So we've got the logical switch. So if I just explain it in relation to our PowerPoint. So we've got our logical switch in our management client, which is my real machine, and it's the Chrome on there. And we're looking what's inside the ESXI server. The logical switch with VM Workstation installed is supplying all these addresses as DHCP, and it's natting through that and allowing us to have effectively, we're on the same network. So this management client is, I'm not going to go on to show you what my IP addresses are, but it's created a virtual interface to allow us to speak to that network on that 192.168.160 network. So we're on the same network, so it allows us to communicate and allows us to effectively do what we're doing here. and manage it remotely and connect in. So we're connecting these via actually being physical files, but this one is being connection through the DHCP IP address. So that's why it's quite interesting, and it's handling traffic from two different methods. Just a better way of putting it, really. Cool. So I'll wait for this to get to the point of the desktop, and then we'll reconnect. See you in a sec. So I'm just going to quickly talk about an issue of sysprep and cloning. So currently sat on my ESXI server GUI, the vSphere site, and something that with that, if I start cloning machines, so if I start duplicating them, by default VMware should change the MAC addresses and change the GUIDs, but I'll show you something, and it's something to sort of keep note when playing with virtualization, especially playing with virtualization and Windows. Doesn't so much happen within Linux, but within Windows this is a quite common thing, that you will have to use sysprep to change some values within the registry. So if I was using vCenter and not so much vSphere, I would be going, you can, instead of just snapshotting, you can also clone, and cloning is a direct copy of the VM. But what should happen, as I said, it should change its MAC address and GUID. I'm going to show you where these lay and where sysprep lays within the file server. So on the file server, just get it open quickly. Cool. So I'm just going to registry. I got on the registry of this machine. Once I've allowed it to boot, the registry, regedit, I go local machine, software, go down to Microsoft, and then crypto. This is where it's called the SID or the GUUID. This is the sort of refers to the machine identification. Basically, if I was to delete this, if I delete it and reboot it, it changes one of the identifiers of itself. Won't stop it networking, won't stop it working as such, but it basically provides its identity a little bit more further down the level. So when we start talking about like layer 2 as MAC addresses, this is more within sort of the application layer. It's an identifier between the presentation and the application layers, that what they work with for the actual client itself. So we can change this by deleting that value or renaming it, and it will generate a new one. Doesn't often work when trying to change that if it's a conflict with another, but you might end up with a duplicate one if you do clone a machine. And the way around this, and I'm not going to do it now because we've already set the host name and the IP address, but if you're at the beginning stages of having the build out, sysprep is located Windows System 32 sysprep, and basically I'm not going to run it, click generalize and experience. So that will out the box, that'll produce a whole new computer really. So that'll blandize, it's almost like opening a new one. It will set new passwords, it will set new names and blank IP addresses effectively. So that's if you have to sysprep it, that's what it will do. It will run that. Okay. So I thought I'd show you that. If you ever get into a position where you're struggling to join a client to the domain, which I have through a cloned VM, and we're working with virtualization, it might be worth sysprepping. It's just a bit of an idea. So it looked like in the background that my DCO1 was done. Yep, so let's start setting this up. So there's, yet again, this is the local admin for this computer. Take a little bit to get to the desktop, but I'll let this, oh, no it didn't. Cool, I just thought it would take a lot longer considering we're playing with this and it's based on the ESXI server. So capital P at SSW0ID, we'll set the client name, we'll set its IP address, we'll let it reboot, and at that point we've then got two servers. We could choose either one really, despite the name of DC01 to be the file server and the other one to be the domain controller. But we're going to stick with it. And then we're going to make this one the domain controller using Server Manager and installing those roles. Okay, so together quickly on this section of the video, we're going to be doing the IP address and hostname again. You might want to jump on if you've already seen that element, but just to recap, once this is hit the desktop, we'll hostname and IP address. Cool. I'm going to set it within the 10 network. So I'll go straight to the IP address just to cause less confusion. You can do it either way. We'll leave it a sec because Server Manager is going to load on this. In a moment, I might increase the cores as well between videos. Cool, so that's detecting a network. I'm not going to let it detect anything on the network just yet because I'm going to say no to that, and because we're going to put in a static IP address because it's currently DHCP. I can verify this by going to CMD. I'm trying to do it while it's all loaded. It's not great to do it, but come on. Might want to watch this on 2 times speed. Oh, cool. IP config probably produce very slowly. Right, so 192.168.16.143. So we're currently on the other network. We've got a DHCP IP address. I'll show you. So we can't tell that this is a DHCP IP address yet with this typewriter style. As it comes in, shout, oh, I just went a bit quick. DHCP enabled, yes. So that's asking for an IP address. Cool. So what we're going to change that is to no, because we're going to set one quickly. If I right click, oh no, open, don't troubleshoot. No one ever uses the troubleshoot. Cool, right, just closing this down, it's just far easier. Right. Let's just close everything because we're going to be rebooting anyway, and so this is right click open. Cool. Change your adapt options. We've only got one network card sorted for this. Properties, IPv4, and then DHCP, so we're adding a static, so 10.0.0.1. And so to move to the next one, I'm just adding dot. So if I go, so that's 255.255.255, and then hitting tab for the next one, 10.0.0.255. So that's technically that is the broadcast address of. No, it's not. 254 is the last usable. 255 is the broadcast address for this network because it's a Class C subnet mask. So we're only using that as the host, and the rest of that is the network. And then preferred DNS, we can actually probably leave this blank, but I've got a habit because this is going to be the domain controller, and itself is going to be the DNS server. I just put 127.0.0.1. It's going to be set as that during promotion to domain controller anyway, but that's something that I tend to do is put 127. I'm just going to validate and then exit. Okay, and this should identify and then come up. Hopefully that'll chop straight off, but command prompt. Let's check ipconfig. I've got my IP address and ipconfig all. It's just things to check. So DHCP enabled, no. Got the physical IP address, which that's VMware. The first unique identifier on that is the vendor. Automatic detective network. No, cool. So that's fine. We've got our IP address and we've confirmed it's set. We've still got to change the host name, and that changes after the reboot, but we've got to set it first. So I tend to click on Documents. We can see this is still set. We can remove that, but if I just right click Properties. Oh, here we go. Rename this PC and DC01. Cool. Next. That'll set, and then that'll have to reboot, so that'll reboot, and we might, I'm still in 50-50 whether we're going to lose connectivity to this, because we've now set the IP address outside of the comfortable range that we've got. Because it's using IP traffic, and we've set it outside of our own virtual our logical switches, sort of layer 3 addressing, and what the DHCP server is allocating to us. But no, we're still on. Cool. So that's going to reboot. We'll have them. I'll bring them both up, and then what we'll do is we'll get this one and promote it to a domain controller. Cool. Cool. So now it's rebooted after we set the host name. We're going to Control Delete and then make it a domain controller. While I'm at it, I might install VM tools just to make it a little bit more efficient, really. Cool, so I'm just gonna wonder if I can do this through this window. So install VM tools. What it should do is attach a background ISO to it. And then we'll just have a quick look, see if it's installed it. Yeah, so that's the VM tools attached. If I just set up. If I do it on that one as well. So just make everything run a little bit more smoother. So VM, install VM tools. And then we'll click on that again. Let's see if this runs. Yeah, that's on. Installer. Set up. There you go, that's better. Cool, so they're both installing VM tools now. So what VM tools does, it improves resolution, allows drag and drop from the physical machine to the virtual, things like that. It's really makes the world a lot easier when working with sort of virtualization, really. Cool, let's bring it on. Next, I'll go complete. It's not that big of an install. Install, and next. This is what clicking too many times gets you. And install. Cool. This may even increase performance slightly on the domain controller. There's elements already sort of being installed. So there you go. So that's the resolution now sort of working. That's a lot better. Restart it, just post VM tools install. That'll last to restart as well, and hopefully the resolution of that will increase. That'll fit to window rather than fitting to itself. Yeah, installing video drivers. Here we go. Improving performance. And hopefully that will increase to the size of the window. Here we go. So FS01 is rebooting. DC01's now actually got bigger as well, and then that'll have to reboot as well. Cool. So let's do things in order properly now. So what I'm going to do is just shut FSO1 down, almost like it's a real machine. So that's the standalone one, and then DCO1 is running through the ESXI server. Hopefully its performance will increase. And that's just saying the FSO1's devices have disconnected. Cool. That's powered off. ESXI server is running in background, and that's running from that. It does blow my mind how things have come on. I remember having physical servers for a lot of equipment, and it sort of first coming in with ESXI server and vSphere client prior to it going to the web console. Cool. Let's make it a domain controller, providing I can get the password correct. I'll show you the old way of doing it, and it shouldn't work. So used to do it one of two ways. Go DC promo. This is like a very old way, and if we hit enter, it should come up with an error saying this isn't how you do it anymore. Yeah, cool. Use this is relocated to server manager. So if it was server 2003, if you do deal with old versions, DC promo is the old way and server manager is the new way. So we have to basically install roles and features. So that's what we're going to do. Server manager is correct inventory, so allow it to settle in. I'm jumping a little bit quick, so I'm just going to make this full screen just to allow it to, there we go, look like at least a real server. Cool. So it stopped winding, and we're going to crack on. So we're going to build this as a role-based server, DCO1, IP address confirmed, happy days. And we're going to install Active Directories, domain services, add features, and then it's next effectively. We can add other things within this. We can make it a DHCP server. I'll leave that out for now just because it complex this build. I want to do domain control first, then any add-ons after. Make it a fax server if I wanted to, and obviously not that I would, but web services as well. There was an exploit for the fax server not so long ago, but web server, if we want IIS, that would probably be in a separate part of the video or supplement or top up. Cool. So Active Directories, domain services. If I wanted, I'll just speak through this a little bit more. If I wanted to make this a trusted CA, a certificate of authority, I'd add that one in. If I wanted WSUS, so Windows Services Update, so that's for your patching. If I wanted to, where's Radius? Remote authentication. So volume authentication services, KMS, so that's to do with Windows licenses. Network policy access service, so that's if you want to set up things like TACAX Plus or Radius, for example, which are AAA authentication for network devices, so you can use your Windows credentials to use to log on to network devices. It's a lot more accountable, really. Obviously you've got Radius or TACAX Plus. I'm just going to click pretty much next on this. It's good to see that this is at 4.8 features. Previous versions are at 4.7 for .NET framework, which will prevent a lot of other services being installed, and a lot of services require 4.8 and above. Brilliant. And obviously it's got Telnet. So we can install Telnet client, for example, even though it's unsecure. There's Telnet TFTP. We can install SMB version 1. I don't know why you'd want that, because it's open to Eternal Blue. There's lots you can do with this, like lots of specific roles, which are already installed by default but not activated. So cool. Next, allow to restart. Yep, and install. Cool. This will take a little minute, and then once that's installed, we then configure it as the domain controller. This basically is allowing us to install Active Directory users and computers, group policy manager, DNS, and we're going to be touching all these within this video, so happy days. And this is everything we're going to be touching prior to moving on to the file server. So we're going to get our domain controller pimped effectively. Everything installed, a couple of users configured, a couple of groups, correctly set up security groups, and then a little bit of group policy, and then we're going to join a client to the domain and then see how our group policies affect that client. Oh, and OUs, organisational units within Active Directories. I know there's a lot of lingo, but I'll show you very quite slow time how we create the OUs and where they're, what they are and what affects them. Cool, we'll just wait for this to reboot and then get ready to install. I'll probably come back once this is finished. So that's the install complete. It says close and it's probably going to ask me to reboot. And if it doesn't, I'm going to anyway. It probably says require reboot. Does it say require configuration required additional? So that's asking me to continue there. Close. Right, I'm not happy that it's promote to domain controller. Before I continue with that, I like it to have a reboot, so I'm just going to cancel the wizard. I'm going to reboot this. I'm going to watch it reboot. So I'm going to the reason it's fresher effectively, I feel like if you're installing domain services, which is quite a big thing, it's better to leave it in a state where it's clean. It's something that I believe whenever I've dealt with domain controllers before and installed it through DC Promo or through Server Manager, that it did ask for a reboot. And obviously Server 2022 might be more effective, but it's still the same operating system, and if I've got procedures that worked before, might as well run them now. Of course, that's just rebooting. Hopefully it might be a little bit quicker after the VM tools are installed. It's not too slow, is it? It's not too slow. Cool. I have chosen the most uncomfiest chair for this broadcast. Right, nice one. So we're pretty much away really. Once Server Manager's loaded up, we'll get back on it. 3 notifications, probably to do with VM tools, apps running. Building a Windows domain is not a quick thing, but it's something that it's easy to go wrong, but it's easy to go right, because at the end of the day it's different to what we covered in networking with configuring switches and things like that. Here we go. So that's collected the data about pre-deployment, so we need to promote to the domain controller. Here we go. So this is where we create our domain really. This is sort of the more interesting bit about where we decide names or what we're going to call things. So add a new domain controller to existing, add a domain controller there to an existing domain, no. Add a new forest. So this is still catching up with itself. I'll just let it all settled in. So what we want to need to select here is add a new forest. So to briefly look at this, so you've got a domain, then you've got a forest, then you've got like a rainforest effectively, so it's many trusted networks and many trusted domains together. Is that a tree? Yeah, so you can have a forest and almost like a rainforest, which is many forests together. So if you think about a big enterprise network, you might have one company then trusting another just as they procure another company and add their domains together and trust it. So one user can log on at any different site and pull up their resources. So here we go, it's all sort of settled in now. So if we go add new forest and add root domain name, so this is our domain name. So I'm going to go, yeah. So if I go here, cyber core skills course, there's a maximum number. I think it's, I don't want to guess it. I think it's something like 16 or 32. Whoop, I'm just going to domain name maximum length. So domain name maximum length is 256 characters. Okay. I lied. I thought there used to be a more precise limit. So I'm gonna go cyber core skills course dot local. Cool. So that's going to be my domain name. You don't necessarily have to have it in capitals, but I quite like to. So that's now creating our domain. So whenever we join a client to the domain, it's going to be cyber core skills course. Domain functional level. Oh, it's only 2016. So it's basically saying allowing other domain controllers of 2016 to join my domain. So if we knew we were joining a tree or a forest or a domain to this with an older domain controller which served 2008, a sort of shudder, then we can accept that. But we're going to have it as 16. It allows us to do additional security features. Cool. So this is now setting the password, not for our local administrator for the server, but the domain administrator. And within this, they shouldn't be the same. This is something that shouldn't be the same as any local. They should be very much different. You can see here, this is going to be a DNS server. If you've got a DNS server already, you can set it up and untick that, but we're doing it. Global catalog. So a global catalog is based on server roles. So you've got things like, you start getting into the real quals now. So you start talking about FSMA roles or additional server roles. Basically, it's what provides the authentication services. So you can split that up and have different servers doing different things. That's as far as I'm going to get into the sort of global catalogue with regards to the different roles. But DNS is the big thing, domain name service or domain name system. So this is going to be domain name system server. Cool. Do I want to create DNS delegation? So do I want to use a separate DNS server? No, I'm all good. This is going to be, so delegation cannot be created because the authentative parent zone cannot be found. So there's no parent. So if I was joining an already existing domain or forest, then that would be it. NetBIOS name, it's a little bit old school. It's pre-DNS basically. But allow that to create itself. Normally it creates like a shorter version, so it'll take a little minute. Yep, CCS. See? Cyber core skills course. Happy. And then next. This is the path of where we're installing. So I'm going to talk about this for a minute. So normally you wouldn't just build straight into a server like this. Normally you'd specify, normally you'd set up hard drives. So I've only got one 60 gig partition within this build itself. But if I go manage, let's have a little look. Oh, does that come up with, yeah, server manager, I imagine. File and storage. This, here we go. So this is my storage management volumes. So this is saying I've got one hard drive of 60 gig and there's separate partitions within that. That's to use for the different volumes. But what we can do is split this down. So I can extend this volume and also shrink it, scan for errors, properties, manage drive letters. On other servers it looks a bit different. So you can basically partition and then set up, this is software RAID between hard drives. You can set it from the BIOS level or the server level, so this is basically, it will start throwing different bits. So if I was to have 3 hard drives and use RAID 5, because that does striping and spanning, that's the best type of RAID really, or RAID 10 requires more additional hard drives, I think it requires 5. But you can set up from there. So that's done within this window anyway. I'm not going to go too far into that. That's probably a separate bit of theory to be covered. But I'm going to go back to setting up my... Oh no. Oh no. Okay, let's see if I can jump back in. So we've not actually created our domain, I don't think, just yet. I think we might need to go through as I've closed that, I'll go server manager again. Let's see if it pops up, or do I have to go through the menu again? It'll take 2 seconds. So we briefly mentioned about RAID. RAID is a separation of hard drives. You've got mirroring, striping, and spanning, which will then incorporate both. Cool. Right, let's add that in. Promote to domain controller. No, I've got to start again. Take 2 seconds. This is probably the most dangerous time to exit out of that menu, but I didn't press finish and it didn't install, so we're good, we're good. So let's just check what, if anything, did get installed. So at the minute, this is the Active Directory's domain services. We've got users and computers. So we haven't got a domain at the minute, so if I click users, it should go, hold on a minute, there you go, managing computers, it will be local. I'm just going to click out of that. So we can't set up anything because we're not a domain yet. And here we go. So new cyber core skills course dot local. You can have .com or whatever your domain name is. Generally that would link in with what how the patterns you would use. 16 were good, DNS were good. Domain administrator password again. Next, we don't need to create a cool. That's the NetBIOS, predecessor to DNS, as I said earlier. Then the paths, which normally you'd store on a RAID area, but obviously we're just using single hard drive for this. But we're on an ESXI server additionally, which added complexities into it. And review. I'm pretty happy with the options we've chosen. And checking for prerequisites, that'll take a little minute. Then all we do is press install. So it'll automatically reboot a few times during the process. So all prerequisites successful. These are a couple of warnings saying 4.0, prerequisite complete, press install. Cool. So this will reboot. I'm going to drop out and come back when this is all complete, because this might take a little while. So we're at the point where we've promoted our domain controller to a domain controller. Let's log back on after it's rebooted and see where we're at. So at this point it should be a domain controller. We should be able to access Active Directory users and computers, which is one of the main places where we start making this domain controller and an authentication point, a central authentication point for our domain. Cool. So we'll let it settle in and just take up the logs. And then Active Directories, users and computers. So with that, we've got our domain and we've got our domain controller sat within our domain DC01. Cool, so I'm going to stop the video there and then move on to a sort of subsequent video to make this really effective. So I can add our file server into there next, and that should appear in computers, which nothing does at the minute. Then we're going to add a couple of users, a couple of groups, and really start building out this domain and adding our clients later on with group policies. Cool, I'll see you in the next video.